For 2 decades, Red Skelton entertained millions of people on television. The team that worked with him recognized a different man, but he played the innocent youngster, the goofy drunk, and the joyous clown. The Red Skelton Dirty Hour was the name given to it. His career would have been ruined by what transpired during those private rehearsals. A provision in his will that could have wiped out his whole inheritance was found by attorneys after his death. No one could have predicted the darker reality of America's favorite clown. Red Skelton was born with a lot on his plate. 2 months after the death of his father, he was born in Vincennes, Indiana, on July 18, 1913. Joseph Ehart, his father, used to be a circus clown but quit to work as a grocer. But bad luck struck. The exact world he had attempted to escape, a circus tent collapse, claimed his life. Red's family was devastated by that one catastrophe. They had no resources, no help, and no hope for the future. In a home filled with sorrow and despair, his mother, Ida May, was left to raise 4 children by herself. They lived in terrible poverty. The neighborhood's residents explained it clearly rather than merely whispering about it. Ida May took any work she could find since she was so impoverished. She operated elevators and cleaned floors, and she persisted even when it broke her. Red's family was perceived as hopeless in addition to being impoverished. Because they believed Red was going nowhere, the town's parents advised their girls to avoid him. Those eyes and insults stayed with him, but they pushed him rather than broke him. Started working as a newsboy at the age of 7. His family needed the money, so he stood on the streets of Vincennes shouting headlines. Not because he enjoyed it. Each coin was useful. He observed others, read their expressions, and discovered a way to make them smile. He learned more from that work than from school. He developed his performance skills in addition to selling papers. He discovered that laughter attracted notice. He would never forget that lesson. Then, at the age of 10, an incredible event occurred. Ed Wynn, a well-known comedian, saw him peddling newspapers outside the Pantheon Theater. Wynn took Red inside after purchasing all of his papers. He gave him more than a few bucks. A new universe was opened by him. Wynn gave Red a backstage tour of show industry. It was bright, quick, and thrilling. Suddenly, a door opened for a destitute youngster who had no future and no father. Red had the dream because of that one moment. He gave it a fierce chase. Red left school immediately after meeting Wynn. He did not enter show business lightly. He threw himself into it, appearing on Doc Lewis's patent medicine show at the age of 10. The shows weren't glitzy. They had elements of a touring circus and a sales pitch. Traveled around Indiana, Arkansas, Illinois, and Missouri, making people laugh while assisting with the sale of phony remedies. He didn't behave like a child, even if he was one. He learned what it meant to be a performer by working night after night like a grown man. Red didn't flee from home, according to his mother once. He was caught by his fate. Red entered the world of touring theater when he was 14 years old. After joining the John Lawrence Stock Company, he was cast in tight, somber productions. Even if his weekly salary of $15 felt like a lot, something wasn't right. Despite Red's best efforts to seem serious, the audience always laughed when he made a dramatic statement. He was meant to bring them to tears. They thought he was funny instead. The business chose to fire him after noticing it as well. They left him alone and underpaid in a budget hotel by the Missouri River. It wasn't the end, but it might have been. Red persisted. He discovered the Cotton Blossom, a sternwheel showboat, a few days later. Still holding on to the bygone era of river amusement, it was floating along the river. Red negotiated his way in. He did it all on the boat. Like other performers of the era, they danced, sang, joked, and even donned blackface. There was a fresh task every night. They had to win over every crowd. He discovered how to labor hard, shift quickly, and never allow a silent audience to remain silent for too long. He was saved by that boat. He was also better trained by it than by any school. Red was no longer a novice at the age of 15. He performed vaudeville on the side. He had performed in burlesque circuits, medicine shows, showboats, blackface minstrel shows, and even the circus. He became a clown, just like his father. However, he went one step farther. On some nights, he hosted dancing marathons reminiscent of the Great Depression, where couples danced until they passed out in order to raise money. He was never motionless. He made every effort to continue working and moving. Red was learning on stages, in tents, and in front of the public. but the majority of children his age were learning in classrooms. Kansas City introduced him to something new in 1930. He got Edna Stillwell as a result. She was only 16, serving as a Pantages theater usher. Edna had entered the dance marathon that Red was hosting. She won, not simply danced. She went on to say that Red's jokes were inadequate. He was drawn to that candor. They got married a year later. Edna transcended his wife. She served as his manager, writer, and guardian. He was paid more because of her. She assisted him in his diploma studies. His jokes were written by her. 13 years after their divorce, she continued to write for him. No one knew his beat as well as she did. A small diner was the source of their greatest innovation. They observed individuals dipping donuts into coffee in Montreal. An idea came from that strange little behavior. They produced a theatrical act called Donut Dunkers, in which Red demonstrated several donut dipping techniques. It was absurd, and it was excellent. The audiences adored it. In 1937, New York reserved them for the Lowe's State Theater. At last, they found themselves in the major leagues. Red's success in radio, film, and even the White House was a result of that one sketch. He was invited to perform by President Roosevelt. Red soon started hosting Roosevelt's birthday parties. A significant turning point in Red Skelton's ascent in show business occurred in 1937. He had toured vaudeville circuits for years, but everything changed that August after he made a radio broadcast. On the Fleischmann's Yeast Hour, he did his Donut Dunkers routine alongside Rudy Valley. The airwaves were illuminated by this straightforward pantomime. The reaction was tremendous. Letters from fans flooded in. That year, he received 2 additional invitations to return. Was no longer merely a theatrical actor all of a sudden. He was well known on radio. NBC officially announced it on October 1938. He took Red Foley's place as Avalon Time's new host. Behind the scenes, his wife Edna shaped a lot of the content. She was more than a servant. She served as his primary collaborator and writer. Red stood out because of their collaboration. His personalities, physical humor, and voice acting all translated surprisingly well to radio. It wasn't merely the subsequent action. Red was thrust into a brand new universe and fell squarely in the center of it. Red was prepared for a greater challenge by 1941. On October 7th, the Raleigh cigarette program was introduced, and it quickly gained national popularity. Red debuted several of his most well-known characters here. Junior, the scrawny, cruel child, became a national celebrity. "I doed it" was his catchphrase, and it appeared everywhere. It appeared in war headlines. After the Doolittle raid, one even read, "Doolittle doed it." Children were so enamored with the figure that they contributed to the purchase of a bomber plane named We Doed It. Clem Cattledehopper, another invention, was modeled off an actual Indiana neighbor. Comedian Wonderful Smith also joined the show, as did Ozzie and Harriet Nelson. Their presence shaped the humor of the play and gave it depth. When Red was recruited into the Army in June 1944, the streak came to an end. However, he had already had a lasting impression on American culture by that point. Red first appeared on the big screen in 1938. His first film was Having Wonderful Time, a summer camp-themed light comedy. Douglas Fairbanks Jr. and Ginger Rogers were on the same screen as him. He portrayed the tumultuous social director of the camp, Itchy Faulkner. Red created an impact even in a smaller role. However, the most of his scenes were removed. It was sufficient for critics to see his vigor and timing. The film made over $1 million, which was more than its $966,000 budget. Although it wasn't a huge hit, it did open doors. His trademark moves, such as the donut dunking part, were also gaining recognition in Hollywood. Red became a mainstay at MGM after that. He starred in more than 30 movies between 1938 and 1951. In 1941, Chip Ahoy paired him with Bert Lahr and Eleanor Powell. Then came 1944's Bathing Beauty, which was intended for Red at first, but is renowned for launching Esther Williams to fame. He played a door-to-door salesperson entangled in a murderous scheme in the 1948 film The Fuller Brushman. With its extravagant swimming sequences choreographed by Busby Berkeley and its vivid Technicolor images, Bathing Beauty was particularly famous. Audiences adored Red's character's ability to combine humor and emotion. His approach was distinct and cozy, heartfelt and silly. Through the 1940s, he was one of MGM's most dependable comic actors as a result. Starred in Whistling in the Dark in the same year, as the Raleigh cigarette promotion got underway. The year was significant. He was chosen as 1941's top new radio star. That was no easy task. Legends like Fred Allen and Jack Benny faced him. Why was Red unique? His humor was clean. It was effective for all age groups. No politics, no filthy jokes, just odd, humorous personalities that you and your parents may giggle at. He stood out because of this. He stayed for that reason. In March 1944, everything changed once more. Red joined the Army by enlistment. He was in the height of his radio career at the time. Every Tuesday at 10:30, the Raleigh cigarette program aired. It had one of the nation's top ratings. His sponsors wished to keep him around. MGM didn't either. They attempted to obtain a postponement for him. It was unsuccessful. His last program ran on June 6, 1944. He was made Private Skelton the very following day. His time slot was occupied by Ozzie and Harriet's travels. One of America's favorite voices vanished from the radio in an instant. There were no exceptions throughout the war. Red was not given preferential attention. Like other soldiers, he trained. There was a twist, though. People kept asking him to perform. He performed a lot of comedy shows in between training, often 12 in a day. It quickly wore him down. He wrote in his diary that he fainted during one of the performances. Parts of his act he forgot. The indications were there, but he concealed them. He was transferred to Italy in April 1945. He performed 41 gigs in 6 days during that month alone. He was adored by the soldiers. Red was on fumes, yet chaplains say he lifted morale. His mind and body were failing him. Then the collapse occurred. In Naples, he lost it. He was taken to a military hospital when they hurried him home. He spent 3 months there. What transpired was never actually heard by the public. The newspapers touched it gently. However, it was shook inside. He started to stammer. The man who effortlessly switched between characters was no longer he. He saw a fellow soldier in the infirmary one day who refused to speak. Red attempted to make him chuckle. He began to recover from that brief incident. However, the scars remained. He received his official discharge in September 1945. Later, he made a joke about being the only famous person to enter and exit a private. It wasn't a joke, though. Red didn't choose the simple route. He didn't request a Hollywood unit or a desk job. He transformed as a result of choosing the difficult path. The breakdown has long-term consequences. The stammer persisted. The anguish did too. On September 24th, his discharge documents were signed. Something inside him had changed permanently, even if the battle chapter was over. Red, however, wasted no time. 10 weeks after leaving the Army, he was back on the air on December 4th, 1945. Fans were ecstatic when the Raleigh cigarette program reappeared. Those closest to him, however, saw the change. Red was still witty and incisive, but there was also a darker side to him. Offstage, he laughed less. He retreated more frequently. The edge of his new personalities was deeper. They were the reflection of someone who had experienced something. Red Skelton's program didn't merely occupy another time slot when it debuted on NBC on September 30th, 1951. Rather, it took over television screens. Millions of people were excited to watch Red's performance on television because he was already a radio and movie star. Thanks to a new technology known as the coaxial cable, which allowed people all over the United States to view the program simultaneously, the nation watched live as his well-known comedy took on a new life. Red was pulled off stage by 2 invisible hands at the end of his monologue in the first episode. Although it was a funny part, he had to drop it later since it actually hurt people. Nevertheless, that episode had a huge impact. The sitcom was ranked number 4 at the conclusion of its first season. Throughout every network, defeated Milton Berle, who had always held the top spot, to win Best Comedian and Best Comedy at the 1952 Emmy Awards. It was the beginning of something significant. Red Skelton would influence American laughter for the next 2 decades. Red transferred his program to CBS in 1954. It was a wise choice. He was given more flexibility and airtime by CBS. By 1962, the program had grown to an hour long and was a staple of Tuesday evenings for families all throughout the nation. For almost 20 years, it remained in the top 20. It even peaked at number 2 in the national ratings in the middle of the 1960s. Red pushed the limits of technology in addition to being a comedic leader. He financed for color broadcasts himself from 1955 to 1960, despite CBS's hesitancy to make the transition. Despite its popularity, CBS canceled the show in 1970. They sought younger audiences, not because of ratings, which were still high. Red had an older audience. The network's new strategy didn't work with that. Both fans and industry insiders were taken aback by the cancellation. It served as a sobering lesson that even myths can be disregarded. Early in the TV series, Red's most beloved character appeared. He made Freddy the Freeloader famous in 1952. Despite having very little, Freddy was a silent clown who lived in a shanty and was always grinning. Red's recollections of his father, who had performed as a circus clown prior to his passing, served as the basis for him. Red gave Freddy all of his heart. It was a part of him, not merely a character. Freddy never voiced any complaints. Even when circumstances appeared dire, he had faith that something positive was on the horizon. Red reportedly claimed that of all his creatures, Freddy was the purest. The silent spot, the skits in which Freddy remained silent, became a mainstay of the program. Red told complete stories without using words by using his hands, face, and body language. Years after Red's main show ended, Freddy later received his own HBO special in 1981. It demonstrated that people's affections for the figure were still strong. Red provided spectators with more than just amusement through Freddy. He offered them hope. However, Red's life took a terrible turn behind the scenes. 10 days before his 10th birthday, on May 10, 1958, his son Richard passed away from leukemia. The Skeltons were devastated. Richard had no idea how ill he was. His tiny body was unable to withstand the constant transfusions, despite Red and George's best efforts to shield him from the truth. Richard, who was covered in bruises and had an 4 in his leg, requested his father for one last favor in his last hours. "Will you get Mama that red blanket for Mother's Day, Daddy?" he asked. It wasn't for him. He did it for his mom. His final statements before going into a coma were some of those. At 8:36 p.m., he passed away. With his toys and the plush puppy he had cherished since he was 6 years old, Red and Georgia remained at his side in the hospital room for more than an hour. Later on, Georgia claimed she had suppressed her tears until that point. When she came to see, Richard had requested her not to cry. She finally let it out that evening. Red brought a Sears catalog to the hospital on Richard's last full day. For his birthday, he instructed Richard to choose anything he desired. The boy selected the crimson blanket, a tent, and camping equipment. The blanket, however, was not for him. He did it for his mom. He added that he only wanted a barbecue with a few buddies, not a large party. His thoughts turned to others even as he was dying. His love became symbolized by that red blanket. For the remainder of her life, Georgia carried it with her. Everything about Richard's identity and his significance to his parents was made clear in that moment. Red was afraid to enter Richard's chamber after his death. He didn't change a thing. The toys remained. The packed bag remained. He frequently sat there by himself, quietly sinking into despair. The anguish wasn't always kept a secret. It began to manifest itself in his marriage and his work. Georgia and Red drifted apart. For Richard's sake, they had kept each other together. The sadness that followed his departure caused a rift between them. Their marriage eventually failed. Red's humor started to change. Even though he continued to act, it was difficult to ignore the anguish in his eyes. The space turned into a shrine. It included every memory he was unable to discuss. The clown was allowed to cry there. Red was also a serious painter, but most fans were unaware of this. He began traveling with his mother when she worked in the circus when he was 5 years old. After his father, a clown, passed away before Red was born, the circus became his entire universe. Clowns with red paint, some happy, some lonely. These were not arbitrary parts. They had something to do with Freddy and other characters he had portrayed. His paintings were fetching more than $80,000 apiece by the 1980s. Every year, his lithographs brought in millions. According to some art critics, he earned more money painting than watching TV. His creations have found their way into private collections worldwide. Few anticipated pursuing a second career. But just below the surface, it had always existed. Red was hiding something else. Despite never drinking, he was well known for portraying inebriated characters on stage. His TV career began with his Guzzler's Gin sketch. The audience believed he had personal experience with booze. He didn't. He was actually allergic to it. Even though he was unable to drink it, he continued to hone the performance. In his early vaudeville days, he learnt by observing actual drunks on the streets. He was remarkably accurate in mimicking their slurred phrases, unsteady gaits, and erratic movements. None of it was genuine, it was all an act. Millions were duped by his act, which demonstrated the depth of his genius. The man backstage didn't always fit that picture of the innocent clown. Red frequently let loose obscene comments and ferocious sarcasm during rehearsals with Martha Ray and other acquaintances. Among the crew, these intimate meetings became legendary. It was dubbed the Red Skelton Dirty Hour by some. Riffed on everything, including subjects he would never discuss on television. Red had a special spot in his head for jokes that people weren't supposed to comprehend. According to Lothian, his third wife, it resembled a valve for pressure. He presented one side of himself to the world, but he also needed to chuckle to himself. Red Skelton illuminated American television for almost 20 years, even though it was a darker time. For the majority of those years, his show was in the top 10. It ranked number 7 in its last season on CBS. All of that, however, was irrelevant in 1970. Nevertheless, the Red Skelton show was canceled by CBS. Ratings weren't the reason. Performance wasn't the point. It has to do with appearance. Anything the network deemed to be too old or too rural was turned off. The Rural Purge was the name given to this action. They fired not just Skelton but also Green Acres, Mayberry RFD, and the Beverly Hillbillies in a single sweep, and CBS President Fred Silverman didn't bat an eye. He was looking for urban, younger audiences. Ratings were irrelevant. The legacy was irrelevant. Loyalty to the audience was meaningless. Family favorites were brutally supplanted by edgier television programs like Moss H and All in the Family. Millions of devoted fans were abandoned. Among them was Red Skelton. He was crushed, not just disappointed. When he received the news, he was in Las Vegas playing. "My heart has been broken," he remarked. His show had been in the top 10 for 17 of his 20 years on TV. CBS, however, didn't care. Instead of looking at decades of service, they looked at statistics on a demographic sheet. Red never fully recovered from that treachery, according to his wife Lothian. He felt abandoned by a sector of the economy he helped create. He continued to perform despite the cancellation. Even if he performed live up to 70 times a year, the hurt of being cast aside remained. "I'm upset that they didn't realize I still had anything to offer," he told Lothian. NBC changed everything when they attempted to bring him back for one more season in 1970. The one-hour show was shortened to 30 minutes. Tuesday evenings were replaced with Mondays. The set grew chilly and gloomy. The flow was broken by the addition of a group of young performers. The difference was noticeable to the audience. It felt forced now, as opposed to natural. The ratings fell precipitously. Not even the top 30 were broken by it. The show was canceled by NBC before the spring of 1971. The days of weekly television for Red Skelton were over. Not merely the show was a failure. The connection he had established with the audience was irreplaceable. Red remained steadfast despite changes in the comedy industry. He resisted profanity at all costs. He declined to embellish his act with shock or profanity. "I won't let my audience members' moms, fathers, kids, and grandkids listen to me read what they can read on toilet walls," he declared. Red stuck to clean humor while other comics made adaptations. Some thought he was outdated, but he didn't mind. His listeners were deserving of respect. He continued to act on stage. He went on charity, club, and college tours. People continued to embrace him, laugh, and show up. He demonstrated that clean humor was still effective. He didn't adapt to the times. He stood for his convictions. Then there was an unexpected shock. 13 of his previous authors sued him in 1980. They discovered a provision in Red's will. When he passed away, it stated that all of the Red Skelton show's cassettes should be destroyed. If that were to happen, the writers would not receive any residuals, syndication, or reruns. Decades' worth of labor would be lost. According to Red, he wrote it during a difficult period when he felt abandoned by the industry, but the criticism caused him to reconsider. "Would you burn the only monument you've constructed in more than 2 decades?" he subsequently inquired. He eventually consented to the preservation of a few episodes. The episode showed how much anguish he still felt, yet his change of heart preserved his legacy and the writer's work. Red Skelton has experienced heartbreak in his personal life. Georgia Davis, his ex-wife, committed suicide on May 10, 1976. She made use of a firearm. She carried it out in her Rancho Mirage, California, backyard. It was no accident that the date was chosen. It was the anniversary of the passing of their son, Richard. In 1958, Richard was only 10 years old when he passed away from leukemia. Georgia never recovered. She struggled with despair and drinking. They never made it through their marriage. In 1971, they got divorced. She had been shot in the chest with a .38 in Las Vegas 10 years prior, in 1966. There was ambiguity surrounding that as well. For over 10 years following her passing, she did not perform. He stepped back from the limelight. He was overcome by grief. Red remarried in 1973. Lothian Toland, his new wife, was the daughter of renowned cameraman Greg Toland. Red was 60. Her age was 36. In Anza, California, they relocated on a peaceful ranch. They cared for bonsai trees and reared horses. They stayed away from Hollywood. They stayed away from the commotion. Peace came to him from Lothian. Every day, Red wrote her letters. She saved them, only discovering a few after his death. She assumed the responsibility of maintaining his memory while remaining anonymous. She ensured that Red's efforts would not be overlooked. Red continued to entertain even in the absence of television. He gave over 70 performances annually. Casinos, Carnegie Hall, and college auditoriums. Wherever there was laughter, he went. He began painting as well. Clowns were his main emphasis. They were popular with collectors. A few of the paintings brought well over $80,000. His work brought in up to $2.5 million annually. Behind the scenes, however, the anguish persisted. The sadness never went away. He gave his effort his all. His own grief was the source of every grin he offered the audience. Red Skelton passed away. September 17, 1997. Was 84. Pneumonia was the cause. He passed away in Rancho Mirage's Eisenhower Medical Center. Quiet but hardly idle were his last years. He worked, painted, and performed, but he never truly healed from the loss of Georgia or his son. According to friends, he never fully recovered his delight. His clown paintings had a darker undertone despite their frequently cheerful exteriors. They depicted a man who lived to amuse others while grieving in solitude. The Red Skelton Museum of American Comedy opened its doors in 2013 in Vincennes, Indiana, Red's hometown. His 100th birthday would have fallen on July 18th. It is located on Vincennes University's campus. It is not just a museum. It has more than 200 artworks, rare film, costumes, writings, and even personal belongings that Lothian gave. Events like the Laughter Film Festival and America's Clown Award are also held at the museum. The Indiana Historical Society currently owns the Red Skelton Research Archive. It has thousands of musical scores, photos, and texts. It all contributes to preserving Red's memory. People still remember the characters that Red developed. Freddy the Freeloader, the Mean Whittle Kid, and Clem Kettledle-Hopper. They weren't only jokes. They were compassionate. They were living. His personas influenced American culture. His approach influenced humor. Jim Carrey, Robin Williams, and others looked to him for guidance. For 20 years, the Red Skelton Show was in operation. It took home several Emmys. It became a commonplace item in homes all around the nation. His work still has an impact on entertainment today. He still laughs. His legacy endures.